Hi, I'm Damien Chalk and I'm one of the founding directors for IPS Management Consultants. We're a Aboriginal business based out of regional WA as well as several other sites around Australia, and we've been fortunate enough to grow from 2 of us to 22 full-time equivalents within the last 4 years. Our 4 key service lines are policy and evaluation, business advisory, Indigenous advisory, and organisational development and leadership. And a big part of my background has been in managing big change projects within Tier 1 corporates at a corporate level, but also at a project level. It's my pleasure to be here to be able to provide you with some of those insights from practical hands-on experience that I've generated over that time. So thanks. Change within the context of an organisation is, in basic terms, moving a set of behaviours forward collectively, aligning that with process, systems, and also, I guess, in basic terms, trying to align it to strategy. Sometimes the strategy may not be well known. However, as change agents, our job is to try and evolve that strategy, mirror the needs of the leaders in the business, and try to make sure that we're binding the change to the leadership position and strategy moving forward. At a basic level though, change within an organisation is changing the behaviours and mindset of individuals, and we should recognise this as a part of changing, broadly speaking, in an organisational context, because we need to get to the lowest common denominator, which is a way of saying we need to be able to take people safely through a change process. So how we build understanding for the need for change is by using metrics. It's by actually measuring what's going on within a business. Often it's looking at the future project deliveries or future deliveries for us as an organisation, and we need to build a coalition of people that acknowledge the requirement for change. That coalition will navigate a path through a change process, and that navigation is important. So building that need will come from grassroots often. It also can come from a leadership perspective. But the effectiveness of a change agent is to make sure they're finding coalition partners to engage to help build and bring that need to life. What is often mistaken as change is the need to move a process or a system, or often mobilising on a big project. That's not really change. What would be change in that context would be looking at how we actually change the operating style on that big project from what may be traditionally a very hierarchical focused project delivery structure through the project manager and down, and often project managers can be seen as king, through to having self-empowered teams. That would be a significant change process. So building that need is important, and to do that you've got to create your return on investment. You've got to be able to speak openly about the benefits of change. And so creating a system, a process and a way of working would be a very good way to bring that need to life. We often hear that people feel under-resourced through a change process, and subsequently strategy becomes very, very important. Some very basic strategies are to look into the organisation and see whose role automatically aligns to creating change. So there might be a HR person within the team that would be a normal change agent in terms of the people aspect. There's health and safety officers and managers that are often embracing and managing change every day. They may not recognise that's what they're doing. So one strategy is to look into the team and work out where an element of a role currently exists around creating change. Another strategy is looking at the big picture vision of the whole organisation, trying to diffuse that down to a project level where appropriate, and then trying to align that through to the project management needs through what would be seen as corporate social responsibility or sustainability. By doing that, you're binding the whole organisational context onto projects. By doing that, that strategy should enable you to garnish and gain more resource. The third strategy I could speak of openly is to look at how we're managing ourselves. Often through change, we forget to look after the most important person first, which is you as a change agent. If you think back to when you're on a plane and they're talking about the oxygen mask coming down from the ceiling, the encouragement automatically is to look after yourself first. So first and foremost, what I ask people to think of is, how do you make sure you've got the support you need? From a change perspective, how do you make sure your thinking preferences are ready and able to create a change process? Because often the first person we need to look at changing in the organisational context is ourselves and our thinking style. And I guess the third thing is, how and where do you get your support from, either internal or externally, to make sure you can continue and provide the appropriate bandwidth from a mental capacity perspective to ensure you can navigate the change. Strategies to get management on side is an interesting concept, because often they are desiring the change, they just don't understand how to navigate through it. So I think from a first point of, as I alluded to earlier, metrics would become very important around creating that need for change. From a management perspective, we often want to understand what's the benefit for me and how does this actually impact on my deliverables. So at a simple level, what we need to do is make sure that what we're looking at will start to meet that need. And it sounds really simple when I say it that way. Part of that will be absolutely asking open questions, asking for clarification, being bold enough at times to ask the question that others may not. Another strategy about trying to get management on side would be looking at how we navigate the politics that may sit around a change. So making sure we give them the information. We have a no surprises rule. So when we're working directly for a management level within the organisational context, they are embraced an understanding of exactly where we're at from a change perspective, and they have no surprises when it comes to ensuring they are part of the change journey. The third strategy I can think of around getting management buy-in and management on side is to make sure that we ask them to be a project sponsor or to lead it. Often they don't understand what this means because they've never been involved in a significant change. However, what we can do is we can wrap tools around them to make sure it's safe from a communications perspective, from a change management perspective, and make sure that they see the pathway that we need them to embrace as a project sponsor and lead. The fourth strategy I can think of is how we actually get management and leadership buy-in is at basic levels, make it a project. So create a project structure that will give them comfort that they can see exactly what the steps are, because often the change goes into this big void and they're worried about what the outcome or impact might be. And if you think about it, at a basic level, what we're actually changing is mindsets and thinking, because they may have done something for a very long time. If you put yourself in their shoes for a moment and show empathy, if you've driven to work the same way for 20 years, it would be very unusual for someone to ask you to change that direction and change your path to work. And when you do that, it will feel slightly odd, because you're actually navigating a different pathway. That's what it can look and feel like for leadership and management, who may have been well served by doing the same thing for a long period of time. What we now know, though, is disruption is a normal part of every day. And subsequently, what we also need to do is give them a safe way of understanding the change process. So some strategies for creating a cohesive sense of direction from ground up would be to embrace groups, either through focus groups or through one-to-one interviews or through the management or leadership structure, all the way up and down the organisation, to start to get feedback from the ground of what change might mean to them. Now that sounds really simple, and it is. The good news around change is often we just don't think about what we should do because we're so busy just trying to navigate through this change process. So focus groups is a fantastic way where we might just sit with a small group and say, what does this change mean for you? Or we might ask safer questions than that, because often when we talk about change, that can have an immediate threat response from people. So I guess the second thing that we would look at from a ground up perspective is see what the awareness of the requirement for change may be, because changes happen every day in the work context. Some could be legislative, some could be policy procedure, some could be just work environment changes or work instruction changes. But if we embrace that concept around engaging early from the ground up, it'll take away future threat responses through the change process. Another strategy there may be around looking at the mental capacity of individuals to deal with the change process. As I alluded to earlier, if we have done something the same way for 20 years, or maybe even less, 3 or 4 years, it takes a bit of work to navigate through changing that way of working. This could also be seen as a thinking preference. So we may have a thinking preference. So for example, if you go to pick up your pen, you naturally will pick it up with your preference hand. Whereas if I asked you to start writing with your other hand, that would take some work. So we need to be empathetic around what that change may look like and build time and consultation and practice into the work environment. If we do that from the ground up, you'll find that often the change can take a groundswell, take a bow wave effect where you'll actually push the organisation forward quickly after you've spent that time embedding the roots and the foundations. So if you look at change agents from a skill-based perspective, we want to exacerbate our current strengths. Now, for each and every person, that would be different. So for me to sort of talk about how do we move that forward, that would be a very personal conversation. However, we look at the skills broadly speaking, we need to be very organised from a project management perspective. So straight away, we've got a skill base around project management. We need to have fantastic consultation and communication skills. And those consultation and communication skills will lead us to get a much better result through early and often engaging with people so they feel like they've been heard through the change process. Researching the change is another skill that we'd need to make sure we embrace. Because changes are very vast and broad across the organisational context, if we don't research the change requirements well, there's a chance that we may not see key inputs. The fourth thing is just being able to manage up. And I say just being able to manage up, but if we're not managing our stakeholders well, then they very much won't understand the change journey. A tool that I would often use in a change process would be SCARF. SCARF is a neuroscience model based on managing change at work. And one of the things I would encourage you to look at is how can you embrace those theoretical concepts into your change agent approach. The reason those theories have been designed over time, and there's plenty of them, so please research, is because they work and they've been founded in research. Those then become best practice for us. So I think from a skills perspective, they're very common skills that are seen in everyday life, but we can often get taken down a very technical bent of change. That's important to make sure we've got the right concepts there, but we should never forget the interpersonal skills, because that is where the rubber hits the road, for the want of a better term, where we're going to gain a lot of insight into how people are feeling through the change process. The final, it's not so much a skill, but consideration that we should be looking at from a development perspective is our emotional intelligence and ability to engage empathetically with others. If we can't engage well, then there can sometimes be challenges around how we navigate through the change process. And giving them the opportunity to engage in a safe way is a big part of how we can support others through change. So some of the tools required for large-scale change management would be everything from a project management system approach, spreadsheet, however you want to manage it. through to having specific tools within the change process that help to align or identify things like thinking preferences. So a tool that we use in that space is HBDI, Herman Brain Dominance Index, which is based on whole brain thinking. Why that makes sense from a big change perspective is that we can get the key leaders aligned in terms of thinking preference, and we can understand what's going to work or not. Some other tools that we've used regularly would be the likes of human synergistics product called LSI or GSI, and those two products give immediate feedback in the environment about our effectiveness and how we're engaging with others. Now, whilst it might not be specifically a tool to create change, what it does do is identify behaviour, and where there's behaviour that can be seen as aggressive defensive or passive defensive, we can start to bring awareness to that to overcome it in the change process. Other tools are things like using Kotter's change model or fish theory or SCARF. So there's multiple theories out there. Those tools become really important. Other tools that I would suggest that we need in place would be a communications framework. Very simple, but most often overlooked, because what we do is we start getting in and doing rather than actually taking a strategic approach to communicating. The other tools would be making sure, as I alluded to earlier, we have our support network in place. It might not sound like a tool, but having EAP or external support, a mentor, a coach, becomes really relevant when you're in the hardest pieces of change or the hardest steps within the change process. And by having that support in place, we can make sure our effectiveness continues to thrive in that environment.